The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed condolences. The scent of wilting flowers mixed with the dry, dusty air of the Texas plains, a scent that had been the very breath of my life for as long as I could remember. My father, a man as vast and unyielding as the land he worked, was gone. His will was a shock. $7 million, a fortune that felt both like a cruel joke and a crushing weight. To me, the ranch was the real inheritance. The acres of sun-baked earth, the herd of longhorns, the creaking old barn where my father taught me to mend fences and to be a man, this was my lifeblood. But to Sarah, my wife of 5 years, the ranch was nothing but a dusty prison. We had fought about it for years. She craved the manicured lawns and bustling cafes of the city, a life that felt a million miles away from the grit and sweat of ranching. She wasn't at the funeral. "I can't," she had texted. "I'm not strong enough to be there." A hollow excuse that now felt like a final, deliberate act of emotional distance. As the last mourners drove away in their polished cars, a silence settled over the ranch, a silence more deafening than any noise. It was a silence filled with the ghost of my father's laugh and the emptiness left by Sarah's absence. I walked towards the old barn, my boots kicking up puffs of dust with every step. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, a new kind of grief that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with a life that was slowly, silently falling apart. Pinned to the rough-hewn wood of the barn door was a single sheet of paper. "I'm leaving. This isn't my life." The words were stark, final. My stomach clenched into a hard knot. It was Sarah's handwriting, clean and elegant against the aged, weathered wood. Just like that, in a single sentence, my world crumbled. The grief for my father and the pain of my marriage collided, a brutal, crushing wave. I wasn't just grieving a death. I was grieving a life I thought I had, a future that had just vanished in a puff of dust. The setting sun painted the sky in a violent palette of red and orange, a beautiful and terrible end to a beautiful and terrible day. The old barn stood tall against the burning sky, a sentinel to a life that was no more. I felt a single solitary tear trace a path through the grime on my cheek. It was a tear for the past, for the future, and for the man I was supposed to be. In the days that followed, the ranch became my sanctuary and my prison. I threw myself into the endless backbreaking work, each task a hammer blow against the wall of my grief. I'd wake before the sun, the air cool and crisp, and work until my muscles screamed and the stars were the only light. Mending fences, feeding the cattle, checking the water lines, the physical labor was a welcome distraction from the emotional pain. It was a way to ground myself, to find some semblance of order in a world that had become chaotic and meaningless. The ranch hands, old men who had worked this land for decades, saw my pain but kept their distance. They respected a man's need for solitude, for a space to work through his sorrow. Their silent understanding was a comfort in itself. They would just nod in my direction and continue with their work, leaving me to my own thoughts and my own loneliness. One afternoon, as I was struggling to repair a collapsed fence line on the far side of the property, I heard the familiar rumble of an old Ford F-150. It was Thomas, my neighbor, a man whose face was as weathered and kind as the land itself. He parked his truck, got out, and walked towards me without saying a word. He simply handed me a beat-up thermos and a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Gotta eat, son," he said, his voice low and raspy. He didn't ask about Sarah or my father. He didn't offer a single word of empty comfort. He simply sat down on the dusty ground and talked about the weather, the price of feed, and the endless challenges of a cattleman's life. In that moment, I realized that true support doesn't need to be a grand gesture or a carefully crafted speech. It's in the small silent kindnesses that remind you you're not entirely alone. I sat there on the ground, eating the simple sandwich and drinking the warm coffee, a feeling of deep gratitude washing over me. The pain was still there, a constant ache in my chest, but for the first time in weeks it felt a little lighter. Later that day, my father's lawyer called. "The will is finalized," he announced, his voice clinical and detached. "The $7 million has been transferred to your account." The news should have been a source of relief, but the money felt less like a gift and more like a heavy, cold weight. a symbol of all that I had lost and all that I was now alone to bear. The months that followed were a testament to my own stubbornness. I threw myself into the ranch's revival with a vengeance. I was no longer a grieving son or a jilted husband. I was a man on a mission. I hired a new foreman, a young driven guy named Ben who was full of fresh ideas. We invested in new equipment, expanded the herd, and even started a small online business selling artisanal beef. The ranch became a reflection of my own will to survive and thrive, a testament to my resilience. But my fragile peace was shattered one crisp autumn morning when an unexpected guest arrived. It was Sarah's parents. They pulled up in a sleek black SUV, a jarringly out-of-place vehicle on our dusty drive. Her father, a man I had always respected, looked at me with genuine sadness. "She told us you were unfaithful," he said, his voice low and heavy. I was stunned. The lie was so audacious, so cruel, that for a moment I could only stare at him, speechless. "That's not true," I finally managed to say, my voice raspy with disbelief. Her mother, a woman of icy composure, cut me off. "We're here to collect some of Sarah's things. She's starting a new life and wants no part of her past here." I let them into the house, my heart a pounding drum of anger and hurt. They took a few boxes of clothes and personal items, a cold, clinical act that felt like an erasure of our entire life together. As they were leaving, her mother paused, a chilling smirk on her face. "You should move on too," she said, her voice laced with venom. "She's happy now. She's with a new man who's much better suited for her." The words were a calculated strike, designed to inflict maximum pain. And they worked, but they also brought a strange clarity. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, the lies, the coldness, the new man. It wasn't an emotional breakup. It was a planned, cold, and calculated betrayal. I stood there, watching their car disappear in a cloud of dust, the anger burning in my chest, a cleansing fire. It burned away the last remnants of my love for Sarah and replaced it with a hard, cold resolve. I wasn't just a grieving husband anymore. I was a target. The cold, hard rage that settled over me became my new fuel. It was no longer about proving myself to Sarah or anyone else. It was about uncovering the truth, a truth I now knew was more sinister than a simple betrayal. I worked with Ben, my foreman, to modernize the ranch. The work was a form of therapy, a way to channel my fury into something productive. The ranch was now a place of renewal, a testament to my resilience. But a part of me was always on high alert, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Then it did. I got a call from an old friend from the city. He sounded hesitant, but the urgency in his voice was clear. "Man, I just saw Sarah," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She was with a guy. I'm pretty sure it was Mark, your dad's old lawyer." My mind, which had been racing in 1,000 directions, suddenly went still. The pieces snapped into place with a sickening finality. Sarah's departure, the timing of the inheritance, the new man. It was a plan, a cold, calculated scheme to take my money. The anger that had been simmering for months now boiled over into a quiet, seething rage. It wasn't just about the betrayal of a marriage. It was about a conspiracy, a plot hatched in the very office where my father's will was read. I hung up the phone and walked out into the open field. The vastness of the land, a cruel mockery of the small petty cruelty I had just uncovered. I looked up at the endless blue sky, the rage now a cold, hard knot in my gut. I was ready for a fight not just for my money but for my life. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get a notification as soon as the next part of this story is live. The rage had a new, icy focus. I was no longer a victim. I was a man on a mission. I drove into the city the next day, the urban sprawl a jarring contrast to the wide-open spaces of the ranch. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the clamor of a million hurried lives. I found the address my friend had given me, a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel. I rode the elevator up, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. When the doors slid open, I saw him standing in the hallway, adjusting his tie. Mark. My father's lawyer. He was a pillar of the legal community, a man of quiet authority, but now he seemed small and pathetic. "Mark," I said, my voice low and steady. He turned, and the blood drained from his face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. You're supposed to be—" "You were in a fire," he stammered, his body recoiling. The words echoed in the silent hall, a sickening revelation. A fire. They had not just wanted my money. They had wanted me dead. My mind flashed back to the week after my father's funeral, to the strange lingering smell of gasoline near the barn, to the way the hay bales had seemed so unnaturally dry. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a planned act of arson. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, hard resolve. I had to get away before he raised an alarm. I backed into the elevator and watched the horror on his face as the doors slid shut. The silence of the elevator was deafening, filled with the horrifying realization that my wife and my father's lawyer had tried to murder me. The reality was more monstrous than I could have ever imagined. The emotional pain of betrayal was nothing compared to the physical fear that now gripped me. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. I had to prove that they had tried to kill me. The truth, when it came, was a tidal wave. The fire at the barn was not an accident. It was a deliberate, calculated act. They had set it believing I was inside, lost in a grief-induced sleep. But luck, or perhaps fate, had intervened. I had been working on my old truck late into the night and, exhausted, had fallen asleep in the back seat. When the flames erupted, the truck provided a strange sort of shield, allowing me to escape without being seen. The fire department had ruled it an electrical malfunction, a plausible lie that allowed Mark and Sarah to proceed with their plan, believing me to be dead. They had planned to take my inheritance and my land, and with my death, they would have had it all without a fight. The realization was a physical blow. The emotional betrayal I had felt was nothing compared to this cold, clinical attempt on my life. I went back to the ranch, my mind reeling, the wind a cruel whisper in my ears. I knew I couldn't go to the police yet. I needed proof. I needed to catch them. The rage was no longer just about me. It was about justice for my father and for the life they had tried to steal. I called Ben, my foreman, and told him everything. "I need your help," I said, my voice grave, "but you have to be careful." He didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, boss, whatever it takes." We were a team now, bound by a purpose far bigger than a ranch. We had to create a trap so airtight that they would have no choice but to confess. The plan was simple but risky. We needed to get Mark to confess, on camera, to the arson. I called him, my voice trembling with feigned desperation. "Mark," I said, my voice shaky, "I'm still struggling with the will. I can't seem to make sense of the legal documents. I need your help out here at the ranch." He hesitated, but I knew the temptation of the 7 million was too strong for him to resist. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said, his voice too eager. "I'll help you sort through everything." The bait was set. Ben and I spent the rest of the day rigging a hidden camera in the barn, a small device disguised among the old hay bales. We also had a plan to subtly bring up the fire and watch him unravel. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. We knew we were dealing with a ruthless and dangerous man, but we had to do this. We had to prove they tried to kill me. The sun set, painting the sky in fiery hues, a painful reminder of what could have been my final moments. I was no longer a grieving son or a jilted husband. I was a survivor, and I was ready for justice. Remember to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the exciting conclusion to this story. Mark arrived the next morning, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place against the backdrop of the dusty ranch. He carried a leather briefcase, a prop for the role he was about to play. He surveyed the ranch with a calculating gaze, his eyes darting around as if he were already mentally taking possession of the land. We went into the house, and I laid out some old paperwork, pretending to be utterly confused. "I'm still having a hard time with the fire," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's been months, but I can't stop thinking about it. It was so strange." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his composure beginning to crack. "Accidents happen," he said, his voice flat. "It's tragic, but you have to move on." "I know," I said, my gaze fixed on his. "But I can't shake the feeling it wasn't an accident. The fire investigator said it was an electrical malfunction, but there was a smell, a faint smell like gasoline, before the flames. His face drained of color. He froze, his facade crumbling. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. The mask was off. "I know," I said, my voice now cold and hard. "I know you and Sarah did this. You set that fire. You tried to kill me." The words hung in the air, a final, unarguable accusation. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing. He was trapped, and he knew it. He began to sweat, his eyes darting around the room, desperate for an escape. He was a cornered animal, and I knew I had him. He tried to deny it, but his words were a pathetic, trembling mess. "I don't know what you're talking about," he repeated, his eyes darting around the room, desperate for an escape. Just then, the front door opened, and Sarah walked in. She had come to collect the final remnants of her things, unaware of the trap I had laid. She stopped dead in her tracks, her face a mask of shock and terror. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, staring at me as if I were a ghost. "I came to say hello, my darling wife," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "and to thank you for trying to kill me." The color drained from her face, and she looked at Mark with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "He knows," she hissed, her voice a poisonous whisper. Mark's composure completely shattered. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling. "Please," he said, his voice a desperate plea. "It was her idea. She convinced me. She said we could have it all, the money, the land." Sarah's fury erupted. She turned on him, her eyes blazing with hatred. "Don't you dare lie," she screamed. "You were the one who found the loophole in the will. You said we could have everything, and that the fire would make it look like a tragic accident." The hidden camera in the barn, the one we had set up earlier, had captured their entire exchange. The confession, the betrayal, the ruthless blame game. The truth was out, raw and ugly. The police arrived shortly after. Ben, watching from a safe distance, had made the call as soon as we had a solid confession. They led Mark and Sarah away in handcuffs, their faces twisted in a mix of fury and despair. As I watched them go, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of justice and peace. I had my land, my father's legacy, and my life back. But more than that, I had my dignity. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a man who had faced betrayal and murder and walked away with his head held high. The next few months were a blur of court dates and legal proceedings. The evidence was irrefutable. They were found guilty of attempted murder and arson and were sentenced to a long time in prison. The $7 million was once again safely in my account, but it no longer defined me. It was a tool, a means to an end, not a measure of my worth. My true wealth was the land, the vast open Texas sky, and the trust I had built with Ben and the old ranch hands. They were my family now, a testament to the fact that you can choose your tribe. The ranch was more than a home. It was a sanctuary, a place of healing and new beginnings. I finally understood what my father had been trying to teach me all those years ago, that some things are more valuable than money, and that a man's true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in the strength of his character and the love of those who stand by him. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your thoughts on this incredible journey. See you in the next video.